Hi everyone, it's Jennie Love from Love and Fresh Flowers here to do the takeover for Lisa's Instagram Live today. This is Ask a Flower Farmer, and I'm going to just hang out for a second while a few people load on. And while we're waiting for people, just a reminder for those of you that maybe don't attend these very often, you can ask lots of questions over the next half an hour. I'm here to talk about all things farmer-florist related, which means that I am a farmer-florist who grows flowers for weddings and then designs those flowers. So it's the full cycle from seed to centerpiece, and that's kind of my niche. There is a little bubble with a question mark down at the bottom of your screen. You can enter your questions for me in that little bubble, and then I'll be able to see them easily and make sure to answer them. Please don't put questions in just the general comments section because those scroll up and down the screen really fast and I can't find them. So if you have a direct question for me, please pop that in the question bubble down at the bottom of your screen, and always feel free to chat amongst yourselves in the comments section while I talk about what I do. So there seems to be a lot of people on, so I'm going to jump into a little introduction about myself. My name is Jennie Love. I am the owner and operator and head farmer of Love and Fresh Flowers. If you want to find me here on Instagram, you can go look me up as Love N as in Nancy Fresh Flowers. So that's all one word, Love and Fresh Flowers. I also have another Instagram account called No-Till Flowers because I'm the host of a podcast called No-Till Flowers, which is all about regenerative flower farming and eco-conscious approaches to gardening and growing flowers and other crops in general. So if you'd like to check that out, that's over at No-Till Flowers, and on Instagram, that's all one word, No-Till Flowers. And then the podcast, if you want to look it up on your podcast app, is No-Till Flowers. So, and so today I agreed to jump on and take over Lisa's Instagram account because I wanted to be able to answer some questions about being a farmer florist, somebody who grows their own flowers and designs with their own flowers, because currently you can register for my online course with Lisa through the Gardener's Workshop called The Wedding Process. So that's open for registration right now, where I coach and mentor people on how to become a farmer florist the way I have been. I've been doing flower farming professionally for 15 years now. My farm is located in Philadelphia. We're standing in my greenhouse right now. I steward about 6 acres of land in the city of Philadelphia, actually inside the city of Philadelphia, not out in the suburbs anywhere. And I feel really fortunate to have this space and this experience to share with others. So with that in mind, I see lots of bubble questions popping up. So I'm going to jump in there. Feel free to ask me pretty much anything at this point. I will say that we're going to try to wrap this up in half an hour because I've got a lot going on today, but I'll try to get through as many questions as I can. So from Claire, we've got, my snaps seem to get powdery mildew every year. Is it something I'm doing wrong? Not necessarily. It could be slightly your fault, but generally speaking, powdery mildew is just part and parcel of flower farming. So a couple of things that might be sort of quote unquote your fault is that you might not have enough airflow around your plants. Powdery mildew tends to come in when there's not enough airflow. So you may be spacing your plants too tight, or if you're growing in a tunnel or greenhouse of some kind, you may not be venting often enough to get airflow through there. So a couple things you can do is widen the spacing, or put some fans circulating some air around, and make sure you've got plenty of ventilation if you're growing indoors in a greenhouse like this. The other thing that you can do is try to approach powdery mildew in a natural way where you try to combat it naturally. So there's something called Korean natural farming. It's going to be too dense of a topic to really dive into right now, but I encourage you to look up Korean natural farming, or it's often shortened to KNF. And within Korean natural farming, there is this natural homemade input spray, essentially a spray that you can make called LAB. So you can look that up if you put into YouTube or some other search tool. You can put in KNF LAB, and you'll find videos for how to make this. But essentially what you do is you sort of culture a bacteria called lactic acid bacillus within some raw milk. Very, very easy to do. It just takes a few days. And then you take that cultured bacteria, which is in a liquid form, and you spray your plants. And that lactic acid bacillus is what I like to consider Pac-Man, and it's going around and it's just chomp, 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 eating up that powdery mildew and a lot of other pathogens on the leaf surface. So it's actually a really great way to combat powdery mildew. So if you got a pen and paper, just write down Korean natural farming, LAB, go to YouTube. There's a lot of great videos about how to make that. All right, so next is Roy's garden. It says, how many days should you harden off seedlings? That really depends on the time of the year and what kind of seedlings you're growing. So in other words, if it's early spring and you have some fairly warm loving seedlings, but it's still really chilly outside, you should harden them off, I usually say, for at least 7 days outside. But if you've grown some zinnias and they're little seedlings and it's already in the 70s and 80s outside, you really only need to harden them off for about 3 days. So really you just have to consider how tender those seedlings are and how drastic the change will be for them from where they've been growing and being coddled by you to where they're going out in the garden. And then you have to decide about how long is it going to take them to adjust to that. So there's not a hard and fast rule. Anywhere from 3 to 7 days is my general rule of thumb, but it really depends on the time of the year and what the flowers are. All right, so Rory's garden also asked, how much should I fertilize fall planted seedlings after they are planted outside? I don't fertilize any fall planted seedlings here at my farm. We rely more on increasing the soil life and the general overall soil fertility and health, not necessarily fertilizing seedlings themselves. So in this case, it really also goes back and depends on your own personal context as to how much fertility there generally is in your soil and in your garden and in the general how you've been treating your seedlings. As a rule of thumb, I would not encourage anybody to really heavily fertilize fall seedlings. Fall seedlings, those cool annuals that are getting planted out right now, you don't want them to ramp up and go crazy with growth. All that growth is just super tender and it's going to be just scorched by the cold over the winter, and there's a greater chance of them dying overall if they get too big and too bushy before it actually gets cold. In the end, those plants tend to die faster than the ones that stay sort of small and compact and low to the ground. So I would generally say do not fertilize your fall planting stuff. So I'm happy to answer questions about growing like this, about seedlings and hardening it off and stuff like that, but I would really love to hear from people that have questions about being a farmer florist and doing wedding and event designs. So I may skip through some of these questions just to see if there's some specific questions related to the topic today. And then I can always come back and answer the other questions. So please guys, load on any questions you have about being a farmer florist and doing design work with the stuff you grow yourself, and I'm happy to answer those questions in particular. All right, so Rach3434 said, I'm having trouble getting my bed started. What do you recommend and how do I get it started? I raised my flowers in raised beds this year, but want to extend to growing in the field. So this, again, so many things in flower farming and gardening are context related. So it depends in this question, like how soon do you want to start growing? Do you need to plant something yet this fall, Rachel? Or are you hoping to plant next year out there? What kind of equipment do you have to make this transition? And how much space are you talking about? So I personally like to do everything no-till here at my farm. So when I want to open up a new space to plant into, rather than getting a tiller out, a rototiller, and disturbing the soil, instead I get tarps out and I lay the tarp over the space that I want to grow in, and I smother whatever grass or cover crop or whatever it was that's in that space. I use the tarp. Usually I need to leave it down for 6 weeks or more. It depends on the time of the year a little bit, but generally about 6 weeks. And then we pull the tarp off and we amend the space with compost and natural fertilizers. We do only organic fertilizers here. And then we broad fork it and we plant into that. But if you're trying to get something started yet this spring, then you may need to yet this fall, you may need to do a rototiller, because that's going to be the only way you're going to really break open that ground before it's too late to plant for this fall. So it's a little bit context dependent. Actually, it's very context dependent. So a little tricky to answer your question straight out. But I will say, if you'd like to go to, I have a blog on my website. That website is loveandfreshflowers.com. So LOVEN as in Nancy, freshflowers.com, or you can just Google my name, Jennie Love. And on there, I have several articles that I talked about how to establish no-till beds for your garden or for your farm. And so you can read through a step-by-step process of how that works. And I also have lots of pictures on there, which may illustrate a little bit better. And then you can read through that and try to decide if that's a good process for you, or you can just go with sort of the standard tried and true method of getting a tiller out and tilling up the space. But at the end of the day, all I can say is you just got to get started. A lot of times people get hung up on worrying about if they're doing it just right, the perfect way, which way's the right way. At a certain point, you just gotta go out there and plant. It won't be a bed until you actually do it. All right, now we are on to, whoops, I missed a question. Things sort of moved around, guys. Hold on. I was trying to do them in order. Now I don't know what order I'm in, so I'm going to start from the beginning again. So Flowers to Table said, how many successions of a main season snap like Madam Butterfly do you do in a season? So I tend to do a fall planted snap. So a snap that we just are putting in, let's see, they're not quite ready, so it's probably, what day of the week is it? I can't even remember. So we'll put new snaps into the greenhouse here and the hoop house. We're going to do that in about 2 weeks. So mid-October, I think that's about 2 weeks from now. So those will be snapdragons that grow over the winter, and we'll harvest them very early in the spring, usually in April. Then we have another succession of snapdragons that we do in very early spring because they're cold hardy. So we'll do those successions. We're seeding them usually in January and then planting them out early March or thereabout. Then we'll do what is basically the late season, late spring season snapdragons. Those are the ones that will hopefully bloom through the summer. That's hit or miss for us because we're so hot and humid here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Then we do our fall snapdragons. We harvest snapdragons in the fall too. So the fall snapdragons, we're sowing those in August and harvesting them around Thanksgiving. So that is, I think, 4, if I'm not losing count there. So hopefully that answers your questions. Claire, oh, we did Claire's question already. Okay, so Black Dog, hi. Black Dog Flower Company says, how long have you left your overwintered dahlias in the ground? Yes, so they've been in the ground for 8 winters now. So a long time. They're doing beautifully well. This has been a rough dahlia season for many reasons, but I'm so glad that I have them overwintered because that's the only reason I have decent dahlias right now. So yeah, you can leave your dahlias in for a long time. It's a real key to being a successful farmer florist. Now, this really only is successful for certain farmer florists based on your zone, so you do have to kind of pay attention to that. If you have no idea what I'm talking about in terms of overwintered dahlias, perennializing your dahlias instead of digging and dividing them, again, I encourage you to go to my blog, which is on loveandfreshflowers.com. Go to the blog and look up overwintered dahlias, and there's an article in there about exactly how to do that. So go check that out. Thanks for that little sneaky question. All right, Elmelt White said, my snaps are behind, only have first 4 leaves. First frost is 11/4. Do I plant now anyway or wait? I would be planting those puppies now. We just wait for like basically one set of true leaves. Really, you know, as long as they have a root system to go. I like to get snapdragons out as soon as possible. All right, so we've got, ooh, I did it again. I keep touching things and I don't know where they're going. Sorry, guys. All right. Busy Cat says, how do you recommend someone get started? I'm a new grower and think my area needs a florist. Oh, yeah, definitely. So it's great to be a flower farmer who then becomes a florist. And really, it's just about getting some experience as a designer. So you should take some floral design classes so you know what you're doing and can sort of hone in on the general best practices of floristry, because there's certainly a lot to know to be a florist. And it's not just about how to design the flowers, but it's also how to condition them, harvest them, handle them, store them. There's a lot that goes into being a florist. And I really encourage you to get some training on that so that you make sure that you start off on the right foot and you're not just kind of giving customer things that are going to die in a day or two and creating a bad name for your own business and for local flowers. Once you've got some of that training, then it's just about letting people know that you're a florist, that you actually do it. In my online course that I teach through the Gardener's Workshop called The Wedding Process, there's a whole segment, several hours worth of teaching about how to reach customers and how to communicate with customers in an effective way. And spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with Instagram. So I teach you all about SEO and marketing and how to use different tools to reach customers in your area who are actually going to buy from you, not just follow you on Instagram. So Busy Cat, if you have the time and the energy to do it, I'd recommend taking that class, just because I can go into much greater detail than I can do here. But first, I would say get some hands-on floral training in your area. A lot of public gardens or community colleges offer floral design training. Or if you're near Philadelphia, I do floral design hands-on workshops here at my farm too. So get your hands on that training and then go from there. And I highly encourage you to do it. It's definitely great to add value to your flowers, not just to grow them, but then to add value as a designer so that you can mark those up a good bit. All right. So, who did I miss? I feel like I missed a few. Emily Monk asked, did you learn from trial and error or did you take a course for designing bouquets? Yeah, this couples with Busy Cat's question. So I got officially trained and got a certificate in floral design from Longwood Gardens, which is a public garden here near Philadelphia. So I definitely got the formal hands-on training and I highly, highly recommend that. I will say that a lot of that training didn't really apply to me in terms of the training that I got had a lot to do with using floral foam. It was very traditional design work, floral foam, long stem, South American roses, lots of baker's fern and baby's breath. So the elements that we used in those courses that I took were not really transferable to the design work that I do today, but it was such a valuable and necessary transfer of knowledge to just help me be able to act like a professional florist and understand the world of floristry. And then in terms of designing, I kind of figured out what felt like my own niche, what felt comfortable to me, and then just went with what felt natural. So it's sort of a combination of trial and error, and then definitely a good amount of training from Longwood Gardens. All right, so Still Even Flowers is asking, is it too late to sow hardy annuals like snapstock, Icelandic poppies, feverfew, etc.? I'm in zone 8A, Vancouver, Canada. First frost is generally mid-October with hoops and frost cloth. It's a little late. If you had indoor space more like a greenhouse, like I'm standing in here, or a high tunnel, I'd say you would have a chance at it still. For outdoors, it may be a little too late, but I'm not really familiar with, I've been to Vancouver, but I'm not familiar with growing in Vancouver, so I'm not your best source of information. I would say try to find some gardeners or growers near you and ask them. The ones that have been doing it for a while should be able to tell you whether you can get away with that. But it is getting pretty late to start sowing. It's definitely not too late to plant, but it is a little late to sow them because most hardy annuals need 6 to 8 weeks to establish in the seed tray prior to going out into the beds. And so that's putting you pretty far back. If you're direct sowing, though, I guess that's a question for you. If you're direct sowing into the beds, you could still do bachelor buttons and probably larkspur. I don't think snap stalks and Icelandic poppies and feverfew would come up direct sown. in beds. But you could get away with bachelor buttons and larkspur and maybe nigella still. Those are the three you could probably direct sow in the bed. But try to find some growers near you that have a better answer to that question. Dry Dock Flower Farm said, hi, I took your course last year. Awesome. Just starting to get woodies planted. Do you have a privet, and what other good suggestions do you have for just starting out? I'm going back over your class now. That's awesome. I'm so glad you took the class. For privet, I don't really grow that here very much. It's considered fairly invasive in my area, so be careful with planting privet and find out what your state regulations are on it. Some states will not let you plant privet. It's actually illegal to plant privet. So just be very careful with some of those more aggressive invasive species. I do have some privet that's growing wild on my property, but I never planted it. And I will use that privet, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend going out and buying privet. And then in terms of good suggestions, if you're just starting out for woodies, I assume is what you're asking about. Let's see, I highly recommend Snowball Viburnum. These are ones that I went over in the course. Snowball Viburnum, hydrangeas, nine barks, cotinus. What else do I got out there? I'm taking a mental walk through my woodies field right now. Iteas, Daravillas. There's a whole list. If you took the course, Dry Dock, just go back and review the course, and there's a whole list of different suggested woodies. I also, over this coming winter, for those of you that don't want to dive into a wedding specific course, I do teach very short little online seminars over the winter every year. And one of my seminars is on woodies, and specifically another one is on foliage. So if you want to head over to my Instagram account, which is Love in Fresh Flowers, LOVEN as in Nancy Fresh Flowers, make sure to follow me over there, and then sign up for the newsletter. And there's a link in my profile bio that you can sign up for the newsletter, and then that way you'll get a heads up if anybody on here just wants to know about how to grow woodies. They're kind of a specialty for me. Not kind of, they're very much a specialty for me. Native plants are a big specialty of mine, and foliage is my very favorite thing to grow. So I've got a lot to share about that as well. So if you have a chance and you want to do a little winter learning, I highly recommend taking those classes. All right, Little Flower Farm in Iowa asks, what zone are you in? I am in zone 7 in Philadelphia. And we get really hot, humid winters and very cold, flip that script. Very hot, humid summers and very, very bitter cold winters. So all right, and then also Little Flower Farm in Iowa says, for a Saturday wedding, do you make the bouquet on Friday and keep it in a cooler? I have literally picked the flowers Saturday morning, made the bouquet while the bride is arriving. A little stressful, yes. I need to get my process in order. Thanks for sharing all your info. Yeah. So I like to make the bridal bouquet on Thursday evening. I pick the flowers for the bridal bouquet usually early Thursday morning, sometimes Wednesday evening, and then I store them in the cooler, and then I design it on Thursday evening. Then I keep it in a cooler on Friday, and then we transfer and deliver it on Saturday. The reason for this is, and why you really shouldn't do your process, though I commend you on having the guts to make a bridal bouquet right before the bride comes, that I don't think I have the courage to do. But the reason you should really do it that way is you want those flowers to hydrate and be conditioned perfectly before that bride would pick them up. So wedding flowers are subjected to a lot of stress. They are carried around out of water in bright sunshine, whipped around while people are taking pictures and all sorts of things. So they need to be at their absolutely best condition possible. There's a misunderstanding that freshly cut flowers are the best possible. Freshly cut flowers that were just cut and then arranged are actually the quickest to wilt and die. They need time to condition prior to using them. So that's a two-step process when you're a wedding florist and a farmer florist. When you're a farmer who's harvesting your own flowers, first you need to harvest your flowers and let them condition in the cooler overnight prior to you designing with them. So you need them to have, or it doesn't have to be overnight, but at least about 8 hours. They need to be in a bucket of deep water, sitting in a cooler, or if nothing else, a cool, dark space, as cold as you can make it at that point. They need to just sit there and get used to being cut flowers, getting comfortable. They need about 8 hours to do that so they can hydrate, suck up water, become nice and turgid and firm again. Then you're going to design with them, but in the process of designing with them, you're going to subject them to a lot of stress. You're going to be handling them a lot. You're going to be crushing stems a fair amount, even if you're really careful. They're going to be out of water because you're working with them. They're going to get stressed and wilty again. So then you need to put them back in water, back in the cooler for another ideally overnight stretch, so that they get really firmed up and turgid and in perfect condition again. And then that's when the bride should be able to get a hold of them, because at that point they are a lot less likely to wilt. The way you're doing it probably means that by the time they get their first look and they take their picture, that bouquet sadly is going to be very, very wilted, and some of the stems will have broken. So please give yourself more time. It's going to feel a lot better for you. You're going to be a lot less stressed. That's why I like to make it on Thursday evening, because I find by Friday I'm really humming along. I got a ton of things to do to prepare for a big wedding, and trying to just focus and get quiet and really center myself on the bouquet seems to be easier to do on Thursday evening. The number one thing here is you need a cooler if you're going to be a wedding florist. So make sure you have a cooler. All right. Raise8765 said, first time request for DIY buckets next August. Most important terms in the contract. You need to take a deposit. You need to specify the date that they'll be picked up. You need to specify exactly how many buckets or colors or whatever, the details of the order. And those are pretty much, my contract for DIY buckets is 1 page long, versus for full service weddings it's 5 pages long. So it's pretty short and simple contract, but you do need a contract, and you absolutely should take a deposit. If you want to see a sample contract, you can take my wedding process course through the Gardener's Workshop. I include several templates of contracts, proposals, client emails, how to communicate. We talk about DIY buckets in the course. It's a great way to get started doing weddings if you're feeling a little daunted by it. All right, Blair House Bloom says, what is the approximate minimum quantity of each stem you would recommend when growing for events? 50 stems, 100 stems, 200 stems. What is the minimum you would suggest? Different for vocals versus fillers. Yeah, it's really specific to each wedding and each crop. But I'll give you my general rule of thumb when planting, even if you're not an event florist. Well, maybe. If you're going to try and do bouquets of any kind in quantities. So this could apply also to farmers markets or subscription services where you're going to do, 20, 30, 50, 100 bouquets. My general rule of thumb is you should plant at least 25 of a given shrub if you're going to get, or peonies, perennial. So if you're going to get viburnums, you should have at least 25 of that viburnum. And then if you're going to be planting annuals, my minimum is 128 trays. So there's trays that have 128 cells in them. So we don't do less than 128 of a given annual. We don't do less than 25 of a given perennial or shrub. And then I do very specific crop planning for each wedding that we do, and then base that, I do a whole count. I go through that in the wedding process online course through the Gardener's Workshop. So if you're really getting into weddings and this is the direction you want to go, I highly, highly recommend taking the course, not because, I'm the end all be all. It's just that there is very, very specific crop planning associated with doing event work versus just showing up at a farmer's market and putting together whatever you have. So you really, really need to dial in your crop planning specifically for events. So Blair House Blooms, if you're trying to get into weddings, I recommend you take the course, and I can go into greater detail about that there. Dorothy's Flower Farm says, tell us about wedding buckets. How do we find couples who want a DIY event? Yeah, like you're going to find DIY couples the same way you would find any couples or any customer. You have to really have a website that has detailed information on it, that's easy to understand, that has calls to action on it, and has been optimized for search engines. That sounds really daunting when I just sort of rattle that off, but I talk about all of those things in really easy to break down steps in the wedding process course through the Gardener's Workshop. Basically, you're going to leverage tools like Pinterest and a website blog to get yourself in front of customers who are going on Google and searching DIY wedding flowers put in your town or wherever. So you really need to learn how to optimize Google searches, essentially. And there's several different easy ways to approach that don't involve any sort of coding or significant IT tech knowledge. You just need to sort of understand those steps. And they're it's a little too much information to go into here on this live Q&A, but it's really, really straightforward and easy. The one thing I will say is do not rely on social media. Social media is not the way to sell flowers or really any product. Social media is a very limited range. 10 years ago, that was very different. Now, thanks to the algorithm and everything else, social media is just not the way to assume that you're going to get sales. Instead, you need to really tap into the power of Google, and that's the way people are going to find you. But the first step is to have a good website, and then to understand what search engine optimization is and what tools you have available to do that. All right. We have just, I don't even know what time it is, but probably not that much time left, so I'll go really quick through just a couple more. Bloom Farm Garden said, hey Jenny, hey, do you grow Lisianthus? If so, which are your favorite varieties? Yes, I do grow Lisianthus, mostly for my wedding work. Arena Apricot and Corelli Light Pink are my two favorites for just about anything. But really, I've not met a Lisianthus that I don't